Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this special Tergar International program, My Meditation Journey with Tim McHenry and Stephanie Wagner. My name is Beth Korchinski. I'm a Tergar staff member, and on behalf of my colleagues working in the background, thank you so much for joining us. We have something over 1,000 people watching today via Zoom and YouTube. So let's just go over some of the Zoom and YouTube features for today. If you're on Zoom, you'll have the chat button, which is usually at the bottom of your screen. But if you're on a mobile device, it could be at the top, or it could be under the ... or more menu. And the Zoom chat is open now to say hello, tell us where you're from, etc. It'll be closed during the talk and open again at the end for goodbyes. The Q&A button in Zoom can be used anytime to submit your technical questions, like if you're having trouble hearing, or any questions you have for our speaker today. If you're watching on YouTube, please use the chat feature for all the questions or comments or poll responses. And just a reminder that our program today is being offered in English only. So let's start with a short poll. Have you attended Tergar events or courses? So if you're on Zoom, please answer using the button on your screen. If you're on YouTube, please put your response in the chat. So the responses are coming in, and so far, at least on the Zoom side, I can't see the YouTube side, but we have a pretty high percentage of people who have joined Tergar programs before. So it'll be interesting to see what the YouTube chat says. Okay, and it looks like, yeah, 79% of the people on Zoom at least have attended Tergar programs or courses in the past. But if you're on YouTube, maybe that's a different percentage. We'll have to look at the answers later. So let's see here. Thank you so much for all your responses. And we are coming together today for an exciting conversation between Tergar guide Stephanie Wagner and author, curator, and museum impresario of New York's Rubin Museum of Art, Tim McHenry. This is an hour-long program. And before we close, we will have a little bit of time to pick a few questions from the audience. So please feel free to use the Q&A box on Zoom or the YouTube chat to submit your questions for Tim anytime during the program. And now I'd like to welcome Stephanie to introduce Tim. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Beth. Thank you so much. And so, hi, everybody, and welcome to this very special conversation with Tim McHenry today. I'm very excited to be with you all. I am a senior facilitator at Tergar. And in addition to my work at Tergar, I also am a meditation teacher and a meditation coach with a nonprofit called Healthy Minds Innovations. And I'm very much looking forward to being in conversation with Tim today. And so as I am introducing Tim, you can go ahead and turn on your camera here. So Tim's role at the Rubin Museum is he is the Deputy Executive Director as well as the Chief Programmatic Officer who has been providing visitors to the Rubin Museum of Art with what the Huffington Post has called some of the most original and inspired programs on the arts and consciousness in New York City. Tim, I was telling you before this that I actually had artificial intelligence generate your bio. So I'm going to read it and then you can tell me if you think that this lands, okay? I did the same thing for Miguel Rinpoche when he was actually in Minneapolis this summer. Okay, here we go. Tim McHenry is a distinguished figure in the world of art and culture, widely recognized for his role as the curator of the Rubin Museum. With a profound passion for exploring the rich tapestry of human creativity, McHenry has dedicated his career to curating and preserving some of the most remarkable and thought-provoking collections of Himalayan and Indian art. His commitment to bridging the gap between Eastern and Western artistic traditions has not only enriched the museum's exhibits, but has also fostered a deeper understanding of the diverse cultural heritage represented within its walls. So, we are here today to talk specifically about Tim's meditation journey and also a very special installation called the Mandala Lab, which really is the most complete representation of Tim's beliefs in integrating science, Buddhist wisdom traditions, and artistic innovation to emphasize empathetic experiential engagement as a means of heightening self-awareness and well-being. So, Tim, how did that chat GBT bio land with you?
I'm not sure who to thank more, Stephanie, either you or AI. Although I think AI got it a little bit wrong in the sense that walls are doors. Walls are just a vehicle for another form of transition. And so curating or creating anything within walls is actually not what we're doing. We're actually breaking through them. That's the hope of the lab, right? Nonetheless,
Wonderful.
thank you so much. It was scary and amusing at the same time.
Exactly. I was hoping it would be so. So, Tim, you've had a really fascinating career, and I think you've been with the Rubin Museum for over 20 years. Is that right?
That's right. And the Rubin Museum is going to be celebrating its 20th anniversary in October next year. So I have, yes, been with the Rubin not since inception, but certainly well before it opened. And it was an extraordinary privilege to be involved in a new artistic institution and hub that was going to explore really an art form that was totally undervalued and not really well understood. And our job became to help it make it become better understood and appreciated.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, can you share just a little bit about like the work specifically that you do within the Rubin Museum? I know, of course, the bio outlined a lot, but yeah, it'd be nice to just hear from you sort of what is involved in your role.
Yeah, well, it's changed. And I think I've changed a great deal in the role. So when I was invited, I was working at the New Yorker at the time for the New Yorker Festival. And I was invited to then come to the Rubin and do the sort of create the programmatic life of the museum. So I wasn't a curator in that sense of handling the art. In truth, I knew nothing about Tibetan art when I joined. And so I had to learn very fast. But my job was to make Tibetan art and Himalayan art generally popular. And so I tried to do that by creating associations with the art form or the content, with public figures, with performers, musicians, films. And I tried to do that. I mean, Martin Scorsese came and talked about Kundun with Pico Iyer, for example. Laurie Anderson became, of course, a staple on stage in her conversations with Wim Wenders and many other luminaries in the field. And so gradually we grew an awareness of the Rubin through these performances and these conversations and these film presentations and these ultimate experiences. So that was initially the job. And then something shifted, and awareness in me shifted quite considerably. And then it got deeper and I hope better and more meaningful as a result. And I think the museum also embraced a more introspective and profound registration of what this art could be to the world.
So, you had mentioned that something in you shifted. I'm curious, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, it's slightly perverse that I'm invited to talk about my meditation journey, because when I joined the Rubin, I hadn't meditated. I didn't really know what it was. And of course, all these great teachers were coming through our doors and taking their place on stage. I mean, Rinpoche among them, but also Sharon Salzberg and Charlik Rinpoche and Pernlap Rinpoche. And yet I resisted any temptation to enter that world or try something out, or indeed even seek a teacher. I remember, Sharon would come, and at the end of the conversation on stage with somebody, she would say, "Let's sit." And I thought, no, that's the last thing I want to do. Uh, I was squirming around in my seat and feeling deeply uncomfortable. And of course, my producer brain was rife with a sort of monkey with a producer's hat on, thinking, well, will they dim the lights in time? Are the volunteers at the door when people leave? So I could never really relax into that state of just being with other people in the room and being witness to the space and my presence in the space and the presence of others. It just was not where I was wanting to go at the time. And it was a barrier to me for actually embracing the art in its fullness and its richness and its meaning. And so something had to change. But it wasn't actually a teacher in the conventional sense who made that possible for me. It was a work of art.
Oh, wow. Please do tell more. That sounds really amazing.
Well, I have to say, it wasn't a work of art from 12th century Kham or any place in Tibet. It was a work really more of a performance artist, and her name is Marina Abramovich. And this was the time when she was presenting the work as part of a big retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And so it was 2010, I want to say, or 2011. And I knew Marina lightly. I mean, she'd been part of a group show that we'd presented at the Rubin in 2006. And it was called The Missing Piece, and contemporary artists were invited to reflect through their work on what the Dalai Lama represented in the world. Laurie Anderson had a piece, Richard Gere had a piece, Jenny Holzer had a piece, and it was quite a kaleidoscope of different sort of artistic personalities. And Marina had a piece, and I'd asked all these artists to choose a film which reflected something of the nature of the work or their feelings about the Dalai Lama in this particular context. And Marina chose Pasolini's Teorema to present at the museum in our little theater there. And she came to present it. And of course, the theater was packed. And for those of you who don't know, Marina Abramovich is known broadly as the grandmother of performance art. She currently has another major retrospective, which is opening today, actually, at the Royal Academy in London on Piccadilly, and has already met with great acclaim as a result of this extraordinary exhibition. But so I got to know her lightly, and we discovered that she and I had houses north of New York City, not too distant. And eventually she sent an invitation to come for lunch. And I thought, what does one bring Marina Abramovich for lunch? And so it was fairly late in the growing season, so I was able to unearth with my fingers some fingerling potatoes, and I brought with me a slab of freshly churned butter, and that was my offering. And I sauteed them up for lunch, and she made a salad, and it was just kind of great. And we sort of hit it off in some way. And so we were lightly friendly over the years. And then comes this retrospective, and she invites me to the opening. I go to it with a Tibetan artist called Sonam Brown, and we both attend. And what Marina's central presentation was, amidst all of the work that was a retrospective, the new work that she was presenting, was the artist is present. And what that meant, Stephanie, was that she sits at a small pine table in the MoMA's atrium in either a neck to floor white gown, a red gown, or a blue gown. And that, I remember, for the opening, she was in white. And you were invited to sit opposite her and just sit opposite her, looking at her, and she looking at you. And that's it. That was it. And I thought, who's going to want to do that? I mean, I was so naive. I mean, admittedly, Marina wasn't a household name at that point. She was known in artistic circles as the foremost performance artist of her time, for sure. But thinking that I needed to go and support her and be present with her and just help her out. Naively, I went 2 mornings later, I remember going, and there was a line outside Mome, and I thought, clearly I misunderstood Marina's sort of allure. And fortunately, they were actually just tourists who were going off to the nearest Picasso. And so I slipped in. I was first in line, and I was very proud about that, except a curator then slipped some donors in front. So I had to wait a little bit, but I got my turn. And at that time, a whole line had formed right around the ring of the atrium. And so it was like a theater in the round, and you stepped into that space with all these eyes on you, and impatient eyes too, because they wanted their turn and you were first, right? So you can imagine what that was like. And I remember sitting down in front of Marina at this little table, and my palms were sweaty, and I really didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to sit. Could I cross my leg? Oh no, I couldn't cross my leg. Monkey brain was in full rotation. It was really excruciating, and I think I must have been hyperventilating or whatever. But the most frustrating thing was, Stephanie, Marina wasn't even looking at me. She was all in blue from neck to the floor, and she had her dark hair parted here and in a plait across her breast. And she was not looking at me, but she was sort of looking at my chin, which I found incredibly disconcerting, which of course made me even more uncomfortable. And it must have been about 10 minutes into this that something shifted. I must have settled into some sort of zone. I stopped hyperventilating. I wasn't quite as nervous. And she moved from looking at my chin right into my eyes.
Wow.
Now, question for you, Stephanie. How long have you held somebody's gaze?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Depending upon the intimacy. So of course with my husband, I think it's longer, but for others, not very long. It's a very kind of vulnerable and intimate thing to look in someone's eyes.
It's a very vulnerable thing.
Yeah.
And I was about to find out just how vulnerable that was. First of all, I realized, wait a moment, you can't look at two eyes at once. You've got to choose one, right? So
Yeah.
I chose the smaller one, right? And then I started seeing things such as, oh, Marina doesn't look very well. Her skin was pasty. She looked tired, and I thought she dyed her hair or whatever. I was transferring all this sort of negativity onto her by criticizing how she looked. It was really terrible of me, and I just couldn't help myself. And I wasn't feeling very good about that, I have to say. But that was what I saw. And then something happened. She became my sister. And then she turned into my mother.
Wow.
And I think she morphed into or represented my lover. And then I know we were at MoMA, and so I guess this was appropriate, but her nose started traveling off in this direction, and the planes of her cheeks started shifting. She became like a cubist art piece, and the planes of her face were shifting in front of my very eyes. And I thought, is this what tripping's like? Because it was weird, and it was sort of unsettling, but totally fascinating. And then the grotesque stuff started happening, because I remember that in this transition of all this cubist reorientation of the planes of her face, I remembered that my mother had died. I remember that my father had died. And then the hair of her forehead and the hair of the plait of her hair started growing into her face, sort of like a Lon Chaney sort of werewolf feature, and then growing back out again, then growing aggressively back into the face, leaving only the one eye for me to look at.
Wow.
And I was just riveted, and I knew this was not normal or other. And yet I was determined to see it through to its end, whatever the end was. And then at that decision, something again shifted abruptly, because it was as if Marina had been underwater all this time, diffusely rippled, and that I'd never seen her clearly. And suddenly it was as if she came out of the water, the surface of the water, and sort of rivulets would peel off her face, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, Marina, you're beautiful. And she was young and had rosy cheeks, and she was alive and vivacious. And as I thought this, behind her emerged this Anish Kapoor blue cave. And Stephanie, all I knew was that I needed to be inside that cave. I just didn't know how to get there. And as I thought this, a pale pink corona suffused Marina's form, just her outline. And then I realized I needed to give her something, and I just didn't know what. And before I knew it, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something had arrived on the table in front of us, and it was a solid, cool, yellow slab of butter. And as I saw this out of the corner of my eye, my eyes didn't shift to the table, but I knew it was there. This warm, tingling sensation started right just above my groin and rose up through my torso, warming it as it rose, just suffusing my whole body with this gentle ebb and flow of sweet, sweet feeling. And as it rose up through my face, I could feel the corners of my mouth turn into a smile. And I know I must have been shedding tears at this point. And then it just rose up through the crown of my head, and it kept on coming, and it just kept in waves and waves and waves. And it was just the most unalloyed, gentle sensation. It was sweet. And I guess a word for it would be bliss.
Yeah. Wow.
And that was my experience with Marina. And I realized that minds have a capacity for exploring realities, plural, in ways that I just had not even begun to fathom. And that's when I realized that I needed to take up meditation and explore the workings of the mind, just as the art instructs us to do. And so that's the mission I followed.
Oh my gosh, that is a really incredible story. And the way that you're telling it, it sounds like it would take like 12 hours to have that experience. Do you have any sense of how long you actually were sitting there?
Well, after the fact, I mean, they recorded all these sittings, and indeed some of those faces are in an extraordinary installation at the Royal Academy right now. So if you're in London, I do urge you to go, because you'll be riveted by the expressions on the faces of the public and also Marina in response. So yeah, they told me I sat there for 72 minutes.
Wow.
And there is a coda to this, however. So Marina was a sensation as a result of this show. I mean, she became an international star, and people who read the Daily Mail or the New York Post even got to know who she was. So that meant our occasional dinners together or whatever were kind of off the table. I didn't see her for about maybe a year and a half or 2 years or so. But she came to a talk that, a conversation that Laurie Anderson had on the stage, and I know Laurie's been on this series, and we had a sort of late lunch, early supper all together afterwards. And this was my first meeting with Marina since this incident. And I turned to her and I said, Marina, what was that about? And she just took my hand and she said, it was unconditional love, darling. Right.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And,
That is
and
really beautiful.
And that's kind of what it was, Stephanie. I mean, I had to work out what the meaning of this whole experience was. And the meaning that I interpreted from it was that I had wanted to give Marina something for her beauty.
Mm.
And so that slab of butter materialized in our own reality, because I knew she loved potatoes sauteed in butter. So this was my reference point, right? And so that was my offering. That was my offering. So and that I realized it was without the expectation of any return. It was an offering. It was the true gift. And I realized my unwitting reward for that was this bliss sensation, that the highest thing that humans can do for one another is give. And to be able to give and to receive, you have to be open, you have to be vulnerable. And that's what I was at that point in time.
Wow, that is a very inspiring story, and how lovely that it really, caused you to want to become, familiar with your own mind and start to practice. I'm going to pause before I ask the next question, just because I want to make sure that the audience knows that you have the ability to ask questions in the Q&A box on Zoom or in the chat in YouTube, because in about 20 minutes, we're going to pause and take audience questions. So just want to encourage you to do that as we're continuing our conversation here. So, Tim, I understand then at some point you met Mingyur Rinpoche. So, can you tell us a little bit about what that first encounter was like, how you met him? Because I do understand that he's been involved in this mandala lab project.
Yes, Mingyur Rinpoche played a great role in creating the Mandala Lab and giving us advice. And I spent an hour with him on a Zoom in the middle of lockdown, sort of asking lots of questions about each of the afflictions, the kleshas as they're called, and the corresponding wisdoms. And he was really, really super great. But I first met him at the Rubin. Dan Goleman was bringing him for a book launch of some authors. And yeah, I mean, I was told that he was a great teacher, and that was probably true. I just didn't know any better. So I just treated him like everybody else. I mean, I was organizing the talk. It was a little bit like herding cats. The authors were very nervous. So basically, I just gave him directions like everybody else and asked him to speak up and do all that sort of stuff. And so it wasn't a profound exchange. But what I recognized in him was how totally with it he was. I mean, he was totally cool. He knew sort of instinctively what to do and took direction really well, I have to say. So so he played the game beautifully, and you know what he did? He made me feel comfortable in my role. And that's a sign of a great teacher. There was no sense of his greatness being evident. It was just making the space for everybody else to feel comfortable and able to be themselves and be their best selves in that situation. And so, the authors come down and we had a great session and so on. But that was really the only time I've met him in person. And the other time was on Zoom when, this idea to create an installation that would finally, at the Rubin Museum, really allow the visitor to step inside a mandala and activate through their own experiences and sharing of their own understandings, really experience what these paintings are truly about. And, the Vairocana mandala is this teaching which allows us to have greater clarity in dealing with our emotions, and yet not thinking them, not thinking of anger or pride or envy as necessarily negativities, but rather as tools to help us navigate our life and death with greater equanimity and with less suffering. So this was all conceived during lockdown, Stephanie.
Oh, wow.
We felt that, I mean, we were on a program to change the whole one whole floor of the gallery tower at the Rubin Museum in New York City into some sort of thing that was experiential, that an 8-year-old would be as equally comfortable in as an 88-year-old. And so that was kind of the brief. Quite how we do it wasn't quite clear when we started the process, but how lockdown just opens, for some people, fortunately, opened up a space because we weren't doing the habitual things we were kind of doing all the time. And that allowed other things in. And so this idea to draw down the teachings of the Vairocana mandala happened in that 2 weeks into lockdown, and then we got cracking. And so yes, a year and a half later, it was open in 2021. So that was quite a ride. I'd love to show you some stuff if I could. Actually.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to.
Showed some images and things like that, and I could hold your hand and take you through it. Would you like that?
I would love that so much. Yeah, I know it's a very kind of sensorial experience going into the lab. And so just talking about it doesn't really seem to do it justice. So would love to have you take us through some of the images. That'd be wonderful.
Great. So I'm sorry, I'm going to do this as a sort of PowerPoint thing, but I hope everybody can see that. And Stephanie, are we good there? Can we see?
Yes, it looks great. Wonderful. Thank you.
So we're talking about, first of all, I should say what the Rubin Museum of Art does if nobody has been to it before, but it's the Rubin Museum's job is really to help us understand and appreciate Himalayan art, knowing that most of this art tells us that when we better understand our own emotions and when we better understand and explore our inner workings, we can better navigate the outer world through this. And so obviously the image here is not one of Himalayan art, but rather what we might have experienced as 5-year-olds when we had the desire as to sort of step inside a painting. And this is the painting that we want you to step inside. It's the Vairocana mandala in the Rubin Museum of Art's collection. And, you know, mandalas come in all shapes and sizes. As sun mandalas you've seen before, which then get painstakingly created over a period of days and then get scrubbed away and thrown away into the nearest river as a sign of impermanence. They exist as three-dimensional palaces and concepts of space and time, which are really microcosms of our mind, or at least our mind as it could be. So back in 2011, I want to say, I staged something called the Living Mandala, where practitioners or visitors to the museum could actually step inside the Vairocana mandala physically, as you see here. That was the sort of germ of the idea, but of course it came to its full flowering in 2021 when we opened the Mandala Lab. So the idea here is that at the Mandala Lab in New York, we invite people to step inside the floor and work their way around a physical journey through 4 different chambers of experiences that represent these afflictive states of mind. And these afflictive states of mind, these kleshas in Sanskrit, represent the sort of emotions that tend to get the better of us, like pride, attachment, envy, and of course, anger. And at the center is always ignorance. Ignorance is always the source of all our suffering, as we know from many of the teachings. And so the idea was that there is great suffering and anxiety in the world, and the time is right to actually demonstrate this. And of course, with all the inequities that we're likely to face with climate change and so on, the most who are going to suffer are, of course, our children and our future. So this was an incredibly important thing to try and address. So we created this journey, and here you see this sort of pano picture of the Rubin Museum's gallery floor of the Mandala Lab on one of the opening evenings with people with prams and at that time masks walking around the 4 outer chambers that represent these afflictions. And the idea here is that the Mandala Lab is about how emotions can turn to wisdom. And whether you're 8 or 88 years old, here you can, in the traveling version that we have currently in London, you can enter through these different portals. But what you actually get to experience here is a bodily journey. So as you mentioned when you introduced me so generously, that most of what my work at the Rubin has engaged with is how psychology and neuroscience and Tibetan Buddhist psychology have a lot to say to one another and have a lot to say to us now. And this embodiness, sort of this embodiment of an experience was informed by one of our advisors, Leda Ladwachi, who is head of the memory lab at Columbia University. And she had run a study with students when they were sort of learning from screens, right, during COVID, and to see how we could learn more effectively from screen information. And what became apparent was that when the students actually just touched the screen, just even touch the screen, that piece of information would be retained by more than 15%. That's a big jump. So that really implies that when we embody an engagement, when we embody a teaching, that will stay with us longer than if we just passively listen. And so that's what we try to do when working our way around these various segments. So in New York, the third floor is divided into these 4 sections, these 4 outer chambers, each of which marks a passageway from an afflictive emotion to a wisdom. And they represent basically 2 sides of the same coin. You just have to learn to flip the coin in the air and have it land on your hand on the side that actually helps you rather than holds you back. So the first chamber that we enter is the chamber of pride. And this doesn't mean the pride that you have when you are celebrating your master's degree, or the fact that you got a new job, or something beneficial for others. It's the sort of pride that separates you from others. It's the sort of pride that makes you think egocentristically that you are on a higher or lower plane than others. And here in the Mandala Lab, we offer a mirror to look at yourself honestly, and then a choice of these 4 different states of mind that really could stop you from really being the same as others. And we should actually just sort of see what
So I have to make a choice.
You do. So please pick a token.
Scary. I'm very vulnerable, by the way, to say.
I'll pick one too to to accompany you.
Thank
because
you.
I definitely have one that is relevant for my own.
Yeah. Well,
stuff.
I do. I'm gonna put it. Arrogance.
And mine is the same.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Very important one.
So those were, of course, neuroscientist Richie Davidson, who you know very well, Stephanie, and the activist and humanitarian Zanab Salbi. And so by that very action, both Zanab and Richie have sort of really freed themselves just a little from how they saw themselves reflected, right? The shadow had been lifted by their acknowledgement. And it just goes to show that we're not this freestanding mountain we thought we are. We're not even part of a range. We're just all on a level plane. And that's the transition. That awareness is a transition from this egocentric nature of pride to the wisdom of equality that is experienced in the lab. So the next room, attachment, we explore memories, and particularly memories that we don't even know we have. So 6 different artists from around the world were invited to share a smell that triggers a really strong memory to them. And they made a little video to illustrate their memory. And I was wondering, Stephanie, whether we should maybe watch one of those films together.
Yes, I think so. Please share it.
Great. I will how to do it and see if I can bring this up in a second. Just patience, please, everyone. Thank you. Patience is another one of the wisdoms, by the way, we're coming to that. So let me just get this up. So just as an introduction, this is by the Tibetan artist and filmmaker Tenzin Seton Shokli. He's based in Dharamsala as well as in New York. And his smell is a smell that most of us will immediately recognize. And so I'm not going to tell you what it is, because you kind of left guessing, and you might have guessed already that it was correct. But this is his story. And I've just got to make sure, I'm not quite sure whether I'm sharing my screen at this point or not, am I?
No, you're not right now. No.
So that's
and as you're pulling that up, maybe I'll just mention there's a really wonderful video link on YouTube, which is a 20-minute tour of the lab that Richie offers, and it's really wonderful. So don't check it out now. Check it out after the event. But it's a great different perspective from what Tim is sharing today. So.
It was in the summer of '94, towards the end of monsoon season in North India. It had been several months since my mother was diagnosed with cancer. The doctors decided that she had only a limited time left in this world. My father became aware of this, but since my younger sister and I were both in our early teens, he felt it was best to keep us away from what was inevitable for as long as possible. While my mother was bedridden, I would often go into her room and talk to her. Then suddenly pain would creep into her body, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop screaming. Then my father would ask me to leave the room so that I wouldn't have to see her suffer. I never understood what kind of pain it was that made it so unbearable for her. That summer, two of my elder sisters who were living abroad were to visit the family to see our mother one last time. It was a strange time for our family. On the one hand, mother's illness worried us, but the prospect of seeing my sisters after a long time was too exciting. Monsoon season had already passed when my sisters arrived. One morning, I woke up to find that our house suddenly smelled so fresh and different. It was flowery, clean, and new. This smell that I couldn't explain, announced the arrival of my two sisters, all the way from America and Switzerland. Both in their 20s, they were young and beautiful. I was mesmerized. Then they opened their bags and suitcases, filled with gifts for the family. The whiff of the same smell further filled the air. I imagined that must be how America and Switzerland smelled like. This was the last summer that we were all together as one family. My father, my mother, my 4 sisters, and my 3-year-old niece. Sometime after my sisters left, the smell that they came with also disappeared. Soon after that, my mother died, and we were gripped with a deep sense of sadness and disbelief. At 21, I made my first journey to the West. When I landed in Zurich, my sister was there to receive me. And that smell, that same smell that I experienced during my mother's last days, greeted me again, bringing back memories from the year 1994. On this trip, I found out that the smell that I had experienced was nothing but the smell of fresh laundry. I returned to India after a few months, carrying that very smell all over me.
Wow, I need a tissue. That was very powerful.
Thrilled to
Yeah.
be moved by that film, and each of the scents that the artists have chosen and the memories are radically different. And the whole point here is that your feeling when you smell fresh laundry may be very different, and most likely very different from Tenzin Chokle's feeling. And that's the point. We're all different. We are conditioned differently. We have different DNA. And that's the wisdom of discernment. That's the first baby step towards empathy, appreciating the difference of all of us in this world. And so we are all the same as we learn in the pride section, and we're all different as we learn in the attachment section. And our job as humans in society is to carry both those understandings, those insights with us as we work our way through our lives. So this is a very important understanding that the Vairocana Mandala teachings transmit, and we have fortunately had such talented artists participate in the lab and share their stories in such a profound way that helps register that with the visitors, I hope, in a meaningful sense.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And what I love about what you've done is just like engaging all of the senses. It's just a really beautiful thing. And I was personally moved by Laurie Anderson's snippet in the smell room. And it's in that video that I mentioned with Richie taking the tour of the Mandala Lab, and I was very, very moved by her sharing.
Yeah. So there are 2 other chambers that I won't show now because I don't think we really have time to do so, but one of them is envy. And so that's that sharp-elbowed competitive spirit that we harbor sometimes when we see people getting things that we think we deserve. And so that room is illuminated by a large orb designed by Paul Weinreb. And in that sculpture, the light that is emitted from this extraordinarily luminous orb pulsates at a very particular rhythm, sort of 5.5 seconds up, and then the light dims to the center, 5.5 seconds, and you're invited to match your breathing to that light. And as you do so, with strangers in the room, what happens scientifically is that your heart rates start to align. And when your heart rates start to align, a subliminal bond starts to form, even though they are strangers. And of course, if you do this over time, you become effectively one.
Yeah.
And how can you be envious of someone when there's nobody left to be envious of? There's no other. Right. So that's kind of the embodied teaching of that space. And the final outer chamber, of course, is anger. And you get to bang a gong and dip it into the water and see how the pitch of that gong changes in the water, and then leave it in the water until all the bubbles and the hissing and the fizzing have subsided and the dissonances have faded away. And what you're left with is then a little liminal space between your first feelings of anger and your next action. Out of that space, patience has a chance to grow. And that's the clarity of mirror-like wisdom in that space. And that's one of the experiences. When I explained this to Mingyur Rinpoche on Zoom that time, he totally got it. Oh, he says that's the larger sharpness of the gong slicing through the water. I mean, he totally recognized things that I hadn't even perceived that were actually embedded in the experience, that were actually integral to the teaching itself. So to have his endorsement and that of Ponlop Rinpoche for this project meant a great deal. I don't think we would have gone ahead without it, to be honest.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing those visual images and the videos and that kind of thing. That was very, very helpful. We're going to move into taking some questions from the audience. Does that sound okay to you?
I'd love to hear what people have to say.
Yeah. We just have a couple of minutes, but so the first question is, given your considerable participation in the arts and your connection to artists, could you please speak about your experience of the relationship between meditation and creative practice?
I think making space in a meditative way allows you to be more perceptive of the world around you. And when you are, then you're more open to receiving information. I mean, it's my belief that nobody has actually their own idea, that the ideas are there and they're influenced by all sorts of quarters. And the more you can open up to those quarters, the chances are that you'll be more receptive to ideas. Whether that is true, I don't know. I haven't been at it long enough. But certainly, when you open a space up, that will allow some sort of information and possibly inspiration to come in. That I do believe. And that was certainly the experience of the Mandala Lab when it happened.
Wonderful.
Thank you for that.
Wonderful.
Question.
Thank you. And so the next question is, where can I learn more about the Mandala Lab?
Well, the best place to learn about it is at the Rubin Museum's website, to be honest. So that's, rubinmuseum.org. And just know that there are 2 Mandala Labs in existence right now. One has its home, and that's the original one in New York City. And the other one is a traveling version, a circular freestanding construction that is currently at Canary Wharf in London's Dockland area. And that will be running there until the 25th of November, so you can visit that as well. But just go to the Rubin Museum's website. And what I urge you to do is listen to the audio guides that have been recorded by Ponlop Rinpoche and by John Dunn, who is one of Dr. Richie Davidson's colleagues at the Center for Healthy Minds at Madison, Wisconsin. And he really was one of our advisors, closest advisors on, as a Tibetan scholar of Tibetan Buddhist practice and teachings, to guide us through and help unpack the significance psychologically of these particular teachings. Really instructive.
Wonderful. And so then once the lab closes in London, is there any other touring plans for the lab at all?
Yes, happily. So I can't tell you where the destinations are yet, but there's certainly some very strong conversations happening. The idea is that the lab will travel for some years throughout Europe. And I just have to acknowledge that we wouldn't be able to do this without the support of everybody in the Rubin family who have funded, given advice, and just sort of really put such an effort into making such an unusual vehicle move throughout the world. It's been remarkable, and particularly the Robert Ho Foundation, Family Foundation, its global branch, looking to see how these teachings of Buddhist worth can actually be made more accessible to the general audience in wherever it goes.
Wonderful. Yeah, I hope to be able to experience it someday. What would you tell people who are not meditating regularly about the lab? Do you feel like it's a good introduction to meditation?
Meditate regularly is what I'd say. But because it's like, every day, if you can meditate, it just adds a thin layer of experience and just registering that understanding. And if nothing else, it allows you to relax in a way that gives you greater strength to be able to deal with whatever you're dealing with in that day. It's a real tonic. So I do recommend the regularity of it. But I think the lab will, particularly when you go into the breathing room, where envy is converted into this wisdom of collaborative growth, this all-encompassing engagement with others, that already gives you a bodily sense of how you could breathe. And the breathing pattern is based on a scientific study, again, from 2001, where contemplative practitioners were brought from all sorts of traditions, whether they were rosary bead counters or Sufi chanters, and they were all wired up for their heart rate and breathing rate, and then sent off into their various quarters to do their thing. And within 20 minutes, every single practitioner had defaulted to this around 11-second cycle of breathing, and they didn't know why. And a further study showed that this is the optimal breathing rate to foster coherence in all the bodily systems, balance the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, and generate greater blood flow in the brain. So it became the baseline for healing effectively. So using even just the simplicity of the breathing technique for meditation on a regular basis will be, I think, a great way in. And the lab sort of gives you that option.
Wonderful. And it's wonderful to hear how you blended science and art together. That's very cool. Sometimes we hear that meditation is about being comfortable with the ungraspable and understanding the essence of our mind cannot be grabbed. Is the art expression an attempt to grab the ungraspable, or would you consider it more an expression of this mind?
Well, there's certainly no grasping anywhere. If you want to actually meditate, that's the last thing you want to do, isn't it? I would say how I would describe some early stages of meditation, if you're going into it, is I find, I sort of get into a position which is supportive, but also has a certain amount of discipline to it, so that there's an alignment. And again, this is all about balance. But what I find, Stephanie, I don't know whether you've had this experience, is that I don't sort of get to some sort of level of engagement until all my facial muscles have relaxed. If I sense there's sort of a creasing around the eyes, I'm not going to get anywhere. So letting that tension go first is a really great process, and you just have to bring your awareness to it, just like you have to bring your awareness to your breathing. But once you're there, then, sometimes we're lucky and we get to that space that I call the room without corners. And that's where you are just suspended in this state of balance. And there may be much noise around you, but there's no one noise that's greater than the other. It's all held in a sort of suspension. And that is the most relaxing space to be. So it doesn't feel like holding on to anything. It is just being. And I know that's what we all say, and it's really hard to understand unless you actually just sort of get there. It's so counterintuitive. It's really hard to use language to describe what this process is like, to be honest. And so that's why the Mandala Lab offers these embodied experiences that have enabled people to actually get some sense that there's a possibility of overcoming or handling the situation differently. As John Donne says, it's our feelings about an event are not the same as the event itself. And we often obscure the reality and the truth of some particular circumstance by sort of covering and wrapping it up with our particular perspective and emotions. And what the lab is saying, following the teachings, is that, there's a different way of doing this. And try this, explore for yourself.
Well, right. And I mean, what's really beautiful about using art is that it really helps to transcend the conceptual intellectual mind, right? It really communicates different ways of knowing. And I think it's a very powerful thing. That's exactly what you're speaking to here.
We hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am going to just pause for a moment before I offer you the opportunity to offer some just brief closing remarks. So I know that there are about, I think, at least 20% of you on this webinar today that aren't familiar with Tergar. And so I wanted to just provide you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what we have to offer. So hopefully there was something about this presentation that may have sparked something in you if you're not a meditator, if you're looking for different resources to learn how to meditate or to deepen your practice. So let me introduce you to a really wonderful online program that we have to offer called The Joy of Living. So I'll put the slides up here. So the Joy of Living is an online asynchronous program that you can do at your own pace that really allows you to both learn and deepen your meditation practice. And this is all done, we can move in the next slide, through our founding teacher, Mingyur Rinpoche. So through the Joy of Living training, you'll have the opportunity to receive meditation instructions from Mingyur Rinpoche, who is a best-selling author, a TED speaker, and a spiritual leader. And what's wonderful about the Joy of Living is that it is a progressive step-by-step program that will basically take you from zero, if you know nothing about meditation, to knowing exactly how to meditate. And what's also a very wonderful part about this is that you, when you go through the program, will become a part of a worldwide community of friends around the world. I know for me, this wonderful Tergar community has just been really inspiring and a meaningful part of my life. I've got friends from around the world that I've met through being a part of these trainings. And so it's a really wonderful support to learning to meditate. And you'll also learn how to better deal with stress, anxiety, and difficult emotions, really learning how to transform these emotions into wisdom. So the program is broken up into 3 different levels. So the first level is called Calming the Mind, which is really learning about the essence of meditation is awareness. Then we move into Joy of Living Level 2, which is a series of practices that we learn to open our heart, focusing on learning about love and compassion, joy and equanimity. And then in Joy of Living Level 3, we really learn how to awaken wisdom by being able to see things more clearly, being able to see reality as it truly is. And so we just have a testimonial on the slide here by Evan, who's a Joy of Living student. Evan says, these meditations have been really beneficial in my ability to express love toward others, even if in small ways. And as I've opened up more, my ability to be happy for others and grateful for others' freedom from suffering is slowly shifting my own worldview. In addition to the online pre-recorded materials, you have access to live offerings as well. There's monthly live webinars with the course guides and instructors, meditation instructions by Mingyur Rinpoche. You have access to different guided meditations and tools to track your practice and your daily practice times. And then you have access to a community forum to be able to discuss your experience with the community and have access again to those course guides and instructors to be able to troubleshoot any obstacles to your practice or to really strengthen your understanding through what are called one-on-one practice interviews. And so we invite you, if you are not currently enrolled, to start your meditation journey today by enrolling in a 10-day free trial. And so I believe there is a QR code on the next slide here, so you can feel free to grab. Actually, I'm sorry, go back just to the previous slide for one moment. So you go to joy.tergar.org to be able to enroll. And I also just want to mention, that at Tergar, we've really seen how meditation has the power to help us tame our emotions, be more compassionate, recognize our innate well-being. And so we really believe that people everywhere have the opportunity to change themselves and the world by making meditation a part of their daily life. And so our vision really is to make these practices as accessible to as many people as possible. And your support is vital to our mission of making the ancient meditation practices and wisdom accessible to the modern world. So please consider giving a gift today. We'll just move to the next slide here with the QR code. So you can scan the QR code on the screen or visit tergar.org/donate. So with that said, Tim would love to just offer you any closing words here about how we can stay in touch with you, learn more about your work, any other closing things that you would like to offer here.
Well, seeing that I embarked on my meditation journey through an act of gratitude and thanks to Marina Abramovich, I would love to thank Marina for setting me on that path. But all the artists who've been part of this lab experiment, really, I was so grateful for their participation. And particularly the team at the Rubin, this was a real group effort during lockdown under very straitened circumstances. And we all pulled together and really embodied that process of collaborative growth. So big salute to everybody, all my colleagues at the Rubin. Really, really grateful for their insights and passionate support for this project that continues to travel throughout the world. So, and visit us at the Rubin. The background that I have selected is of the New York City version of the Mandala Lab. Come and visit us there. But we are now a global hub for Himalayan art. And so you can also visit an exhibition at Boston College, if you like, which is called the Gateway to Himalayan Art, which is part of our project Himalayan Art, sort of helping cultivate students to be able to appreciate what Himalayan art stands for in its cultural context. And the Mandala Lab, when it's out in the world, is really helping us all understand that these teachings, as presented by these paintings and these works of art, have something profoundly relevant to share with us today when we most need it. So that is what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was so wonderful to hear your story, to be able to chat with you, and your passion is just really felt. So keep on doing the good work. Thank you. And there were a couple of questions about whether or not this recording will be available. And so this recording is available on the Tergar International YouTube channel, Tergar Meditation Community. So you can just check it out if you want to go back and watch some portions, or if you weren't able to see the entire presentation today. And then you'll also see, Jenny, if you could actually just post those links to the Rubin Museum for everyone, that would be great. So you'll see in just a moment that there's going to be a link to the Rubin Museum as well as the London traveling installation. So thank you so much, Tim. Wonderful to connect with you. Yeah, good luck with the rest of the installation showings and the tour. Yeah.
Thanks to everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie and Tim. That was just amazing. I really enjoyed it personally. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks to everyone who joined us from all over the world today. We really appreciate that. And as Stephanie mentioned, the video recording will be available through YouTube. So please come back, watch it again, share it with your friends. And yeah, we'll see you at a future Tergar event. Thanks again, Stephanie and Tim. Have a great rest of your day.